Today's episode of What's the Big Idea is brought to you by dissimilarity. Oh, yeah, dissimilarity. When we put our students in dissimilar situations from how they've learned in class, we find out just how much they understand. Can they apply their knowledge and skills to a new situation? Are they willing to take the risk to do so? Dissimilarity can be scary for teachers because, well, what if they can't do it? But it's precisely those experiences that show us just how far they've come. Dissimilarity, check it out. Now on to the show. Welcome to What's the Big Idea? I'm your host, Dan Carney. How often do we get to talk about important, big topics and ideas with our colleagues? How many times have you seen PD slated for a Friday afternoon, only to find out it's been replaced at the last second by a department or team meeting? How many times has the urgent supplanted the significant? Teaching involves almost too many variables to count, and we're in front of students every day, so it makes sense that we're constantly up against the next urgent thing. But it's a shame, because I think wrestling with existential questions about education not only exposes us to new ideas and thoughts, it also sharpens our own beliefs. Which is why I love books like Learning That Transfers, Designing Curriculum for a Changing World. Written by a team of 4 educators and spearheaded by Julie Stern, this is a book that's not afraid to ask big questions and then answer them. The centerpiece of the book is conceptual learning, Stern's specialty, and it lays out a compelling case for conceptual learning and offers some practical paths and tools. But it would be incomplete to describe Learning That Transfers as a book simply about concept-driven education. Because much like someone who sets out to clean just that one corner of the room but ends up scrubbing the whole house, Stern and her team begin with conceptual learning and end up taking on so much of what's central to teaching and learning, including assessment, course planning, the role of prior knowledge, cultures of thinking, and how we spend our time in the classroom. On today's show, you'll hear my interview with 2 of the book's authors, English teacher Trevor Aleo and educational consultant and math teacher Kayla Duncan. If you're interested in conceptual learning or understanding by design, or maybe you're an IB teacher, or perhaps your recent PD session got canceled and you're looking for some stimulating conversation, this interview is for you. Happy to welcome now on the podcast Kayla Duncan and Trevor Aleo. Oh, it's actually a longtime friend of the pod, Trevor Aleo. I got to use your full title when you come on here. Part of a writing team behind the book, Learning That Transfers, Designing Curriculum for a Changing World, to be published by Corwin in March. Kayla and Trevor, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we appreciate it. It's great to be back.
Well, Trevor, you could start out by talking me through the team that put this book together, how you came together, and how you sort of agreed on writing this book.
Sure. So Kayla, Julie is definitely the nucleus of the team. This all kind of begins with her, and I guess that she had been doing some work with Kayla for a while in Forsyth, and through the magic of EduTwitter and me just poking her incessantly, I started working with her as well. And Krista, who has co-authored with Julie before with her previous book, Tools for Teaching Conceptual Understanding Secondary, that sort of comprises the team. But Julie had been kicking around some ideas for a book for a while, and Kayla is a human who matches my passion and enthusiasm, and I guess both of us continuously bothered Julie enough where she realized that we have a lot of ideas and energy that could be parlayed into and merge with some of the ideas that she had with the book. So she asked us, was it like last winter, Kayla?
Yeah, I think so. December, January, sometime around then.
Yeah, to join her in writing the book. And she had like a pretty clear vision, the kind of like rough layout for how it would look, but it evolved and changed so much. And obviously we were writing it during a global pandemic. So we had lots of time to sort of think about how this event would be changing and impacting education. And it really gave us a lot of opportunities to kind of like slow down and have some, I think, really important conversations that might have been glossed over had we not had the amount of time that we did. Most of us were privileged enough to be in a safe environment, and we were really able to devote a lot of time to conversation about what sort of ideas we want the book to explore.
And slowing down, I think, is an idea we'll come back to when discussing the book. Kayla, you wrote a book. You're part of a team that wrote a book. What was that process like, writing an education book?
It's something. Trevor knows this. I had an experience in high school where essays, the red pen was all over the place, and so this was kind of a bucket list thing, something that I never thought would happen, but it was a magical process. The flow kind of went with, we had this rough idea of outline, table of contents, what we wanted to go in the chapters, and Julie got the ideas kind of down on paper. And then it was great because from there, I was able to take it and add content, strategies from the student or teacher perspective. And then Trevor, with his brilliance and with words and research, was coming behind and adding in some of that. And then Krista, she's a master magician, and she was able to just wordsmith it and make it sound like one voice and really add in some beautiful points also. So it was a great workflow. I feel like we all leaned into our strengths and were able to bounce ideas and really kind of polish it out to where it could be. And we would have Friday chats where we would have these sometimes deep conversations about the hierarchy or layers of concepts. And I still don't know if we ever actually came up with a final solution or idea for that, but it was great. And like Trevor said, being in a pandemic kind of, we were able to pause, but we were able to think about, what will school look like after this? What should be happening in school? Even if we're not in crisis mode, what would we like for the future of learning, essentially? And then this book kind of is our answer, our thoughts as a result of that question.
And we can get into the book now. One thing I really appreciate about it is that it's not so much a book about subtle shift in pedagogy or specific tools for the classroom, but a shift in our entire approach to teaching and learning. And Trevor, do you agree with that assessment of the book?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a pretty bold, I'd say reframing is the word that we use a lot of times, where in many ways it is pretty accessible and immediately applicable to teachers like next day. We have like next day strategies in there, but in other ways, it really is sort of a reconceptualizing of, I think of like like what is orienting our learning journey, like what is the goal of our learning, which I think can be pretty transformational. But we really try to have, I guess, sort of a transformational direction without telling teachers that they need to throw away everything that they're doing. I'd say it's more about a perspective shift and a reorganization of things that are already there. And from there, we can really start to transform things. Two of the four people writing the book are in the classroom. Julie is working every day with teachers. Kayla is an instructional coach who works very closely with people. So in the classroom. So it was really important for us to center that. And even though many of the ideas in the book are oriented towards thinking about vertical and horizontal alignment, we wanted a teacher to be able to pick up that book and feel like it was speaking to them too. So I definitely think that your suggestion that it is an attempt to reframe and recalibrate what we're doing is definitely true, but we also are trying to be, I guess, aware of the structural limitations that teachers are under. So this still feels like it's a book that they can implement and integrate into their practice too.
I would definitely call it a bold stroke sort of educational book. I mean, as a compliment, there's all different types of educational books, and this is, I think, one that has some really high aspirations. The title's Learning That Transfers. Let's talk about that word transfer, Kayla. Can you help me and my listeners uncover perhaps the concept of transfer? What does that mean actually?
Yeah, so we should have some examples and non-examples. So transfer is this idea that students conceptual understandings. They understand the relationship between two or more concepts. And then they can apply that to a new situation. They can think about, how is this relationship prevalent in this new scenario? Or what of my prior knowledge will help me uncover or solve this problem? And so when we're transferring, we're actively trying to pull on our schema and the connections and the conceptual understandings that we have to solve problems. And then in the book, we have a learning transfer spectrum going from academic to real world transfer on the horizontal axis. And that's really going from, okay, we can transfer an ELA between text. When we read one text and move to the next, that's a simple type of transfer. Or in math, when we solve a word problem and then we take those skills and apply it to a different problem. And then real world is looking at the sustainable development goals or current events and really thinking, how is what I've learned in class, how can that help us tackle or approach this problem? And then we move from similar to dissimilar transfer on the y-axis. So what are things that are familiar, they're easier to transfer, students can see how their conceptual understanding applies. And then dissimilar, we're getting really to where they have to abstract, and it's probably not even obvious, but we're looking for these global patterns between concepts that will really allow us to see how our conceptual understanding and knowledge from the past can be applied to this new situation.
Yeah, that's the learning transfer spectrum that you're describing. It's a really handy tool, I think, for teachers to help visualize what exactly is you're getting at in this book. Trevor, Kayla brought up schema, and I'm curious your thoughts on why is the human brain built so well for concept-based learning?
So it really does take into account the way that our brains organize and store information, as well as the way that experts organize bits and pieces and facts of information into sort of a conceptual framework that they can use to not only retrieve knowledge, but also make sense of new situations. So I think that one of the things that sort of separates us, though, is even though we are looking at the sort of like brain-based cognitive science oriented approach, the goal isn't just to, maximize our students' ability to retrieve information. Our goal is for students to take that understanding and to expand on it and build on it and have them bring it into the real world, to look at complicated situations, whether it's the sustainability goals, whether it's current events, whether it's what they're seeing on TV or the news, and to not only reach back into their schema and pull out information, but also begin connecting it to new things that help them make sense and make meaning of their world. And I think that is looping in your earlier point about one of the ways that we are trying to reconfigure and reconceptualize education is it's not just about, learning the information or the content in the standards. Those are sort of the floor for us. The ceiling is for students to begin reaching out into their own lives, into their own experiences, into the wider world, and to see how their schema can help them problem solve with all the wicked contexts that we are currently trying to navigate. I mean, if ever there was a time where we need to make sense of complexity, it is like the last 2 weeks, and then before that, the last 2 months, and then 2 years. So we are in this moment where education more than ever needs to be oriented towards what we don't know. But not just in a throw the kids in the deep end and hope they'll figure it out kind of way, but in a way that really pays attention to how our brains are hardwired to recognize and seek patterns, to be in a new situation and ask themselves, or for students to ask themselves, how is this similar to or different than things that I've experienced before? And really tap into that analogical reasoning superpower that our brains have been, using to build schema forever.
And I know your book's going to have some great interest for IB teachers, International Baccalaureate, particularly in the PYP and MYP. I myself am an MYP teacher in the middle years. And one of the criteria that we grade on is, across all disciplines, is knowing and understanding. And these two get lumped together in everything that we do. But Kayla, aren't really knowing, is it knowledge and understanding? Those are actually two pretty different things, because it isn't that understanding that allows us to move into dissimilar situations.
Yeah, and we've had the conversation before about transfer of knowledge, transfer of training, transfer of skills, and really talking about transfer and the knowing. We can know facts, we can know specific dates, we can know algorithms, but that doesn't mean that we deeply understand it and can apply it in a new way. And so we like to split those two to where knowledge is important and we need understanding of examples and facts to really help us deeply understand the concepts that we're trying to learn. And the concepts are what will really transfer to those new situations or those different situations. And so it's that understanding, that deep understanding of concepts. And we talk about that in our mental model, and it's acquire, connect, transfer. And so the acquire phase, we believe that you really get to start with that deep understanding of individual concepts, because if we try to get students to connect them or apply them without that deep understanding, it will be superficial or misguided. And so in the acquire phase, we take time for students to really understand, rather than memorizing a definition, what are the critical attributes of these concepts? What does it mean? What are non-linguistic representations? How would I explain the concept to someone else? And then we go into the connect phase, which is where students connect the concepts in relationship through questions, helping to go deeper into their understanding of the unit of study or lesson, whatever we might be doing.
That ACT model that you have, acquire, connect, transfer, is also another really powerful tool for teachers. Very practical, but also powerful. Actually, maybe now we could talk about a specific example. Trevor, do you want to maybe take my listeners through acquire, connect, and transfer in the classroom?
Sure. So we've sort of taken this acquire, connected, transfer model as a way to scaffold a sort of like sequence of learning that students would go through in a given unit. We sort of lay it out and present them, like, obviously, well, one at a time, because that's just what you have to do with the book. But we're really careful to say that it's not only a linear process. Whenever students are transferring their understanding to new situations, new concepts are going to emerge. So it is more cyclical than it is linear. But the goal is you introduce students to a series of concepts. So I'm doing argumentative writing right now in my writer's workshop class. So we spend a lot of time figuring out what is a claim, what is evidence, and what is reasoning. And you show the students a bunch of different examples of them individually, figuring out these are the building blocks or the Lego bricks that really help students understand what are these individual pieces of this broader thing that we are learning. And it was really powerful talking to my students how much they appreciated how the time that we took and the examples that we ran through and some of the cognitive apprenticeship that they underwent as I modeled what these things look like and how, as a writer with expertise, I create them. Because they've written persuasive papers before, but they found that it was just sort of this thing that they did and they didn't really understand it. And now they're like, oh, I know what a good claim looks like because I've seen them, I've written them, I've gotten feedback on them. And then after that, students have to transfer begin connecting those things in relationship. Right? How do these things work together? It's not just giving students a template and saying, okay, here's your claim box, here's your evidence box, here's your reasoning box, fill it in based on what I taught you. Now it's their ability to see, well, how does an effective use of evidence support a claim? And how does reasoning strengthen our use of evidence and support the claim that we created? So I'll give students a bunch of different examples and trying to pull in examples of things that they have sort of prior knowledge of or high interest for them. So they aren't trying to pay attention to both the structure and the ideas, but something that they sort of deeply understand already. So they're exploring, okay, how are these things connected? And then they begin writing themselves. So they'll write like a paragraph and they'll try to figure out how they can find the best evidence to support their claim and what the best reasoning looks like. And then they're peer editing, going back and forth. And we're having a discussion that's sort of reflective about, okay, how do these things work together? So my students will hop in a discussion board and they'll have to kind of answer that question. How are all of these things connected? Then their position paper they were writing, they got to pick a topic or issue that they were passionate about and write a position paper on it. So then they had to transfer their understanding. Now that I know how these concepts are connected, not just in my piece, but in general, they have this wider conceptual understanding. How can I write a argument that's going to persuade my reader to come around to my position on a topic that I am personally invested in? So it's a process of helping students see these individual pieces, see how they fit together, and then having them apply that understanding to a context. Specifically in this case, I really wanted to, they had full choice in terms of their position topic, because I wanted them to see, why should I care what a good claim looks like? Why should I care what effective reasoning or evidence is? And because they're arguing over something that they're personally invested in, that gets that buy-in as well. So then students would transfer that understanding to future texts and future assignments.
And something I hear implicit in your description of that learning process is something that you come back to repeatedly in the book that I wholeheartedly embrace the idea of transparency. I get the impression that you probably are talking about how you're designing the learning with the students. And this comes up, the learning designing, what it means to learn, metacognition, that this is not, it's not opaque, right? The students know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. Kayla, what's the power and role of transparency in this kind of learning?
So we wholeheartedly believe that students should be directors of their learning. And we even put that in chapter 2 as one of the key shifts that has to happen. And students can't direct their learning if they don't know where they're trying to direct or what they're trying to do, where they're trying to go. And so the transparency is to create this partnership between teachers and students and to help students become more aware of what they're trying to learn, what their success might look like. And then they can take onus of what they're doing in the classroom. They know, okay, can I explain a concept in my own words and provide an example? All right, I've acquired understanding of this concept. Can I connect these concepts in relationship and show evidence from class and outside of class? Okay, I understand the relationships here. And so the transparency, we never want to hide the ball from students on what we expect of them or where we want them to be by the end of a set of learning experiences. We really feel if we are upfront with students, then they can become agents in their learning. They can advocate for their needs. And then we have a better relationship by knowing what they need, having conversations with them and providing supports and designing experiences as teachers along the way.
Trevor, that sound like your classroom?
Yeah, I mean that is the goal, and students I think really appreciate sort of peeking behind that curtain a little bit and being involved in the process, and knowing sort of what's coming next in learning sequence, because it's something that even though what emerges is very new and unique depending on the concepts and the context you're placing them in, that sequence is the same. And I really love how Kayla kind of says that, like, this is something that we are doing. Our learning designs aren't things we're doing to students. It's things that we are designing alongside them and are experiencing with them. So I think that goes a long way in not just engaging students, but in getting them invested in their learning. And that's another big shift that we advocate for. Was it's not just about the fun razzmatazz that has students paying attention, but it's about them seeing what's the function and the purpose and the role and the utility of what I am learning in things that I'm interested in, invested in, inside and outside the classroom. So involving them in that process is huge. And it's something that we advocate in the book and something that I do my best to bring into my classroom.
Yeah, and as you repeatedly point out in the book, it's all towards a larger goal than, say, standardized test scores. You write, students need to understand conceptual relationships across disciplines to tackle the world's most pressing problems. Kayla, talk to me about that. What is the big picture goal here?
The big picture is that as Trevor mentioned earlier, the standards are the floor, like they're general expectations or learning outcomes. They're the general expectations that have been developed for that age of students. But we don't want that to cap students' learning or stop them in their learning. The complex goals and beyond the classroom is we really want students to authentically be able to approach problems that maybe they don't have any business looking at right now. Like in 7th grade, I used to teach 7th grade math, and there might be some problems with COVID and with the exponential growth that they don't discuss in 7th grade. However, how could we use our knowledge of proportions and change and just basic graphs and look at it to try to make sense of it? So it's understanding that we might not have the solution, but we're encouraging students to look and take risks and try to find solutions out there. And so we like to think that with backwards design, we're still using that process, but instead of backward planning from the standards, we're backward planning from the real world and the disciplines that we teach. And then from there, we can think about what is our purpose for our discipline? And then what are the modern skills or literacies that students need within that? And then we can look both at those and how it applies to real world problems and use that to really shape our course and the learning rather than mapping from a list of outcomes or a pacing guide.
I think in the last, we could say maybe 5 to 10 years, there's been a growing movement focused on the role of research in education and how we can apply that in the classroom. And I'm always quite curious in reading the points of view from people that are really waist deep in that stuff. But I find myself frustrated by a sort of reliance on test scores to indicate what what research is showing us. Right? We know this works because look at these test scores. And what I really like about your book is that it's showing research being leveraged for a higher purpose. You talk about establishing cultures of thinking, risk-taking, metacognition. Trevor, your thoughts on that, about the role of research in what we do, but aiming for something slightly higher than those test scores?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. One that I hadn't really thought of was I think maybe a lot of times research can be associated with more quantifiable, more concrete, more standardized outcomes. And there is so much powerful research out there that can encourage and shift teachers towards practices that don't just center test scores, but also center students' learning and their ability to transfer. And I think that is kind of a missing link sometimes. It's important to consider the role that research can play in education without it sort of creating these barriers or creating a system that we've talked about some on our podcast with recent guests, where the tail wags the dog, where everything is sort of built towards these quantifiable outcomes, towards these standardized metrics that kind of create artificial barriers and ceilings for students' learning. So it's thinking about and looking for research that can, I guess, push our aims a little bit higher towards more aspirational goals and horizons, while still acknowledging the fact that there is use and utility in bringing in and leveraging research to show that the ideas or frames or models that we're putting forth are based on the way that our brains learn, not as a way to kind of instrumentalize learning, but as a way to tap into what our brains can do potential. And a lot of the research we've been digging into, especially right around the time that we were in the midst of the book, is around analogical reasoning and our ability to think metaphorically, which is something that I feel like lives in many different sort of disciplines or domains in different ways and with different names. A lot of the interesting research that we've seen on innovation kind of is about like this notion of metaphor and analogy as sort of our super human brain trick. So it's been really rewarding to dig into the research, but also leverage and deploy it in ways that promote transfer and promote innovation, as opposed to promote standardization and getting the ultimate utility value for test scores.
I think for a lot of teachers, one of the biggest realignments to their own practice they might find in reading the book is your discussion of time. It takes time for this to work. You say the importance of going slow to go fast. First of all, Kayla, why does it take more time? And secondly, what do you say to a teacher who is very interested in this, but says, have you seen what I got to get through in a year?
Yes, I have those conversations all the time. So the reason it takes time is because it takes time to understand concepts. And even as you might have noticed in Trevor's writing example earlier, even skills and processes, we want students to understand at a conceptual level before we ask them to do those things. And so it takes time to really ensure that students have those foundational understandings and before we can ask them to apply it. And so we can't go from topic to topic Monday through Friday and stick with a pacing guide. But what we recommend is that if you take the time up front and really dig in and identify those priority concepts, or what we're calling anchoring concepts, that can span throughout the units, and then we have disciplinary lenses that will be recurring throughout the year. If students understand those pieces at a deep level, then all the other superficial bits can connect on, but we don't have to ask them to memorize that. And so even though it takes time up front to really get the concepts understood and the students thinking in this way, because the mindset and retraining students on the purpose of school and how to participate and engage in the classroom will take a bit, But as they go through, they will constantly be seeking connections. After they've had time, they'll say, oh, I see concepts here. Trevor has a great example of kids noticing power or something from Lord of the Flies and the French Revolution in completely different classes. And so their brains start actively seeking connections. So as you move through the year and you're looking at concepts, they're constantly going to look for connections and think, what do I know? What do I not know? How does it apply in this situation? But we really can't undervalue the importance of taking the time to make sure students understand those individual concepts. And then we also, there's a lot of stuff in our standards or learning outcomes that it's fluff, it's extra. And we know that we can't teach all of it. So having those conversations either vertically or horizontally with your team and looking at what is it my students need to know or our students need to know this year. What is it that is most relevant for life, is maybe the most meaningful in terms of next year, is going to connect and really provide deep understanding for this discipline. And then let everything else be examples or supports for understanding those pieces. And so we really advocate for scraping out or getting rid of kind of the extraneous pieces and focusing in on those anchoring concepts and what's most meaningful for students.
As you brought up earlier, just the importance of backwards planning. It cannot be overstated. Yeah, in the IB, we have the key concepts and related concepts, and they serve that same function, big picture and disciplinary. Trevor, as I'm sure you're aware, one of the heaviest hammers people swing on EduTwitter is the importance of prior knowledge. What's the role of prior knowledge here? Prior knowledge and conceptual learning are not mutually exclusive, right?
No, it's quite the opposite. I think concepts give students sort of this linguistic sluiceway between what they already know and the concepts that you're exploring in my case, whatever text that I'm teaching, or in the case of a history classroom, whatever period of history they're in. So one of the powerful things about thinking and teaching conceptually is it allows students to use and deploy their prior knowledge in a way that sets them up to make sense and make meaning of whatever context you're exploring in school. I think too often education is sort of framed and phrased where what students learning in school is in this sort of information schematic neighborhood over here. And then what they experience, learn about at home is, on the other side, this other sort of separate, disparate informational neighborhood. And concepts are kind of the super highway between those two things, where it begins to put students into a position where they are realizing things that they have prior knowledge of and understanding of, and that they think about every day can actually connect to the academic content in class. And the example that Kayla was pointing earlier, where my students were drawing connections between Lord of the Flies and the French Revolution, that started with them drawing connections between watching the Avengers. So my students are having conversations about how we're having this sort of philosophical discussion about what is power, what is control, how do people create chaos in order to maintain power over other people. And they're like, oh, this is just like Thanos. So they begin realizing, oh, my discussion about the Avengers with my friends after watching this movie can help me make sense of the Lord of the Flies. And then as I make sense of Lord of the Flies, I begin recognizing these same sort of patterns when I'm in history class learning about the French Revolution. So I think that the more connections that students build in their brains, the more that they realize that their prior knowledge isn't something that is detached or separate or disparate from the learning outcomes in the classroom, but can actually fuel it and scaffold it.
So the mental file folders of sorts, right? The construction of these file folders helps us make more sense of the world. Yeah. Kayla, how important is it for multiple teachers, maybe across a grade level, to be all talking in the same way versus one teacher in isolation working like this?
There's power in numbers, and the collaborative aspect of this can't go unnoticed. One teacher can definitely read the book and try and apply the processes, but if students are doing different things in different classes, then it kind of falls short. And it's just, as Trevor was mentioning, it's contained to just this class now. It's that's happening in English class or math class. That's not learning. Whereas if we're having those conversations across content teams or even entire grade levels, students are getting into this process of seeing, oh, what I'm learning in this class might apply in the next class. They're actively looking for connections within and across disciplines. They understand the mental models and the thinking habits that we want them to have. And then also we can, just in terms of the collaborative spirit, we can look for connections within our content areas, and we can see, oh, where might we overlap? Where can we design these experiences to where it's more interdisciplinary? It's not just math, it's not just science, but we have these engaging contexts where students are using their knowledge of math and science and understanding concepts and connecting them in various ways. So looking for that content connection, and just their having a whole team to really broaden or strengthen student thinking habits would be so powerful.
Yeah, it's incredible how siloed our subjects get. As you say in the book, we shouldn't think of them as subjects. They're disciplines, right? And once we see them that way, they can become more interdisciplinary. Trevor, this is maybe a more minor point in the book, but I thought this was interesting. What is teacher credibility? And why is it important versus something, say, just like teacher professionalism? Why are those maybe not synonyms?
So I'll riff on this shortly, and I'll kick it over to Kayla because her face lit up when you asked that question. This is something part of the book that she specifically worked on in her chapter. So teacher credibility is the idea that it's not just that we want to have great relationships with our students. I think that that's an adage that every teacher is very familiar with, that relationships matter, that students learn more from teachers who they feel like they have an established relationship with. But it goes beyond that a little bit too. It's also important for teachers to demonstrate their own understanding and relationship with the content that they're teaching, to set themselves up and portray themselves as someone who has expertise in the discipline. And if students are invested and bought in to this broader project, they want to look to someone who they feel like can help guide their journey. If we can help students develop their own relationship with the content and with the sort of disciplinary ways of knowing, thinking, and doing, it's really important that we cast ourselves in the light as someone who can help students grow. So that expertise and that credibility is really important. And it's thinking about how we can be credible to our students as just as human beings, as people who are there to support and give our students opportunities to succeed, but also as practitioners within a certain discipline.
Yeah, and with teacher credibility, it's students, there's trust. Trust is the main component. Students trust that the teacher cares about them, will treat them fairly with whatever situation might come up, and they trust the teacher's competent enough to help them. They believe that if they have a struggle, whether it's personal or academic, this person will be there for them and can help them. And so that it improves the relationship and increases their credibility when teachers show, hey, yeah, I can help you. I understand this content. They seem with it. Or if you're a new teacher and it's something that's like, oh, I'm a little fuzzy on this, then you own it and you help the students like kind of look for the answers and find solutions. So they know you will help them figure things out. And teacher credibility being there is what leads to such a strong classroom community, because if we can promote the trust between the student and the teacher, then the teacher can go a long way in promoting trust between students. So that way there's this atmosphere of, hey, we're all here to help each other learn and grow throughout the year.
Yeah, one of the best examples, in my opinion, that you use is how teachers can use curation. And I found that myself. It's, I'm not just giving you the thing and then we're done. You're working through a process, and I can bring in resources that I have and help you in that process. And the students really see you more as a partner than just the teacher at the front of the room. How did writing this book impact you as educators?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think it really made me grapple with all the different dimensions there are to curriculum and instruction. So being in the classroom, it is really easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day, the lesson planning, the standards, dealing with the classroom environment. And it was really powerful for me to think about and step back and look at curriculum from a whole district perspective. And I had done some of that work with my own previous district, but to think about it from all disciplines was a level further back that I hadn't really gone. And I think that as a classroom teacher, it's really valuable to think about not just your class in and of itself, but your class in relationship to other courses in your discipline and also other courses in your district. Like as a whole district, what is the role of your classroom? Because even though we only experience our courses in our classroom, our students are going from class to class to class. And it was really powerful to think about every different aspect of curriculum and instruction K to 12. And I think that is kind of something that we were trying to bring to the book. Is a lot of books I think you'll find are either very targeted towards people who are designing curriculum instruction at maybe a district or administrative level. And then there are other books that are very focused and oriented towards practitioners. And we think it's really important that those two things are sort of both explored with similar frames. You can't have people at the administrative or district level creating curriculum that teachers don't feel like they have the instructional tools to implement. And at the same time, you can't have teachers using instructional strategies and tools that don't align with maybe a broader vision created by the district. So for me, thinking about that sort of the three-dimensionality of curriculum instruction from the perspective of all these different stakeholders is really powerful.
Kayla?
Yeah, so from a professional learning and instructional coach kind of lens, it's helped think about, okay, here are these shifts. Now, how can I support these in my own district? How can I make this happen? I think the chapter about assessment, even though assessment sounds like dry or people are like, oh, let's not talk about that. It's really inspiring about thinking about this, the way that we can use assessment within instruction. It's not a standalone thing. It's just a system of feedback. And then for professional learning, whenever I plan a session now, I think, okay, acquire, connect, transfer. What's the point? So even in a professional learning lens, it transfers, it comes over into my thinking. And it's been great thinking about leading change and what are the steps we would take to enact this book or to get this book going and this kind of system going within districts. And we've been able to have conversations about that. Like if we want someone to take these approaches, we even are writing for your specific role. Here's how you can use this book. Here's how you might approach this text and what it means to you, no matter if you're an administrator, an instructional coach, a teacher, or maybe even a technology specialist. And so it's been exciting to like really think through those frames and think, how can we lead for the future of learning through learning that transfers?
I totally agree that one of the strengths of the book is that it applies to so many different people in education. I think a lot of people will find not just useful, but help them rethink some of the ways they do things. The book is called Learning That Transfers, Designing Curriculum for a Changing World, out in March from Corwin. Kayla, Duncan, and Trevor, Aleo, I want to thank you for joining me. I should also mention, Trevor, you are the co-host with Julie Stern of the podcast Conceptually Speaking, another great listen. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
A big thanks to Trevor and Kayla for taking the time to talk. If you're interested in conceptual learning, I strongly recommend this book, and also one of Stern's early books. It's called Tools for Teaching Conceptual Understanding. There's an elementary and secondary version. And all these books offer not just the why, not just the big picture, but also specific strategies and tools for getting there. I should also mention that Learning That Transfers will be launching a series of online workshops on February 7th. I've linked both the book and the workshop in the show notes. Thanks for checking out What's the Big Idea? As always, welcome comments and questions on Twitter at BigIdeaEd. Music today from Molo. Stay safe out there and keep pushing and challenging and moving education forward, everyone. See you next time.
Hoy es el día que extraño ver.